to the Growth Catalyst podcast. In this episode, I speak with Pia Dekkers, who is a Chief People Officer and coach. Pia talks about HR and how it's a strategic ally. She believes that your employee experience should be treated as seriously as your customer experience. There's some really interesting and practical takes on how to do HR in a strategic way. I hope you enjoy.
So I've been working as an HR people person for a number of years for a variety of businesses. So commercial, not-for-profit, government, and SMEs, etc. And I've had the pleasure of working with all sorts of different people from different walks of life. And my main focus has always been about people development and continuous learning. And because we are always learning, the person who says that they're no longer learning, they've learnt everything, is not somebody that I would ever want as a leader. And I think it's so important that we continue to. Business is only as strong as the people that work for them, and that's the key for me. And it's about HR being a partner. It's about being that balance between people and business. So it's not about being the police. It's about business partnering with the leaders in terms of moving things forward. So, and it's always been my passion to see people develop from new talent right through to C-suite.
Yeah, it's a really timely topic actually, because I know at ZOKRI HQ there's a white paper being written at the moment reflecting just that HR professionals inside of these organisations really do understand and recognise the importance of this strategic work. But business leaders don't necessarily view that HR function as really a critical component of that company's strategy. And has that been your experience?
Yes, and thankfully no. Because for me, the successful businesses are the ones who engage in the people strategy. Because I think, but I have where it's business, and the people are second. But there's a major fight going on there for talent at the moment, because that's one of the hardest things, is about retention and gaining, having that upper hand and gaining the best talent to do the job for you. So I think it's sort of how can I say, it's narrow-minded if you ignore that element. It's about culture. I mean, culture is the key for me,
Yeah, absolutely.
and if that culture is all about tell and do and not collaborate and work together, then I would suggest, well, certainly in my experience, the ones that tell and do have not been successful compared to the ones that embrace a culture that collaborates and works together.
Yeah, absolutely. So helping sort of people officers, those HR leaders, sort of making sure that they've got a seat at the strategic table.
Absolutely.
So trying to free them up from these sort of HR admin functions, and then understanding how they can be involved and retaining and developing the talent to really ensure that the business is driving the right results.
Exactly. It's about, as I say, retaining top talent, aligning leaders with values and building agility through upskilling. And frankly, if that fails, then growth doesn't happen.
Yeah. So just thinking about what's going on in the workplace at the moment, it feels like it's probably never been so hard to run businesses and to attract the right talent and retain the right talent. Have you got some sort of views on what's happening right now?
Absolutely. I think, you know, all the things that happened 5 years ago, and not to focus backwards, but certainly about focus forwards. But that launched us into lots of different things: flexibility, more focus on well-being, and in terms of retention. Brexit created a dearth in the talent pool because a lot of people went home. It's also created a problem when trying to recruit, say, interns or students, just for example, into a business, to give them opportunities and potentially that they can then come back after university. But now, if you're looking for talent from overseas, you have to sponsor them, and the cost of sponsoring outweighs the opportunity to on the return on investment. So that sort of pipeline has pretty much disappeared. And unless the individual can afford to pay for it themselves, then it has become more difficult. I also think that VAT, it hasn't helped. I'm not going to make a political stance, but the fact that people coming over here for businesses not being able to get back the 20% has actually caused problems for people, because people will go elsewhere. And that hasn't helped. I think one of the assumptions around why people leave is about pay. And yes, that is a factor. But the main factor why people are leaving is lack of career progression. And again, companies need to make sure that they focus on programs that allow that succession planning, and it's that career progression piece that is important for people. Before, we've got 5 generations in the workplace, and nearly 6. And so it's about utilizing the skills of all of those people. But before, it was you came up, you did the job, you went home, kind of thing, and you did as you were told. And now people are challenging more. Well, what's in it for me? It's not just about, oh, thank you very much, you've given me a job. It's more, well, why would I choose this company over that company? And a lot of that is about the ethics and values of a company. So again, comes back to culture.
Yeah. So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that business face right now with employees?
I feel that one of the biggest challenge, again, is retention.
Okay.
It really is. It's holding on to people, and making sure that there is that pipeline, and giving people opportunities to maybe pivot and grow within their role. It's not always about getting promoted, because we know that's not always a reality, but it's making sure that people can grow within their roles. So, for example, maybe, have shadow boards, sort of the next level down, that you have, that they can work on a project, but be like a board themselves. So you let them run with it. Is it safe to try? And I found that actually, sort of inspires people. So it's not just the pounds, shillings, and pence that make people go to companies nowadays. It's a lot more than that.
That's an interesting point, actually, because some of the work that we've done together with some leadership teams, the leadership team was saying that they felt that the kind of next layer of leadership, a kind of almost the middle management, but not quite the middle management, that they weren't necessarily stepping up, that the leadership team felt that they were still doing too much of the kind of tactical day-to-day stuff rather than being released enough to really focus on the strategic side of things. But then when you hold the mirror back up to them in that conversation, what were they doing to help the next layer down to step up to the plate? which is feels like it's a very interesting conversation. And obviously, it's going to be a very different conversation inside of any organisation. How's a good way to manage that with leadership teams and, you know, crossing that bridge to the next layer?
Middle management is the hardest job. I'm sure C-suite would disagree with me, but it is, because you're toggling between the two, and it's that, from that sort of operational practitioner piece, and having to manage the view, and having to use ZOKRI's terminology in terms of, you know, very clear OKRs. You know, it's so important that people are communicated with, they understand what's the why of the job. Again, to quote Simon Sinek, for example, you know, helping people understand. And I think for anybody who's a leader, it's about allowing time for people to understand the impact of their role and how they can develop and grow in that role. And as we say, particularly with the middle management, so those leaders that can adapt, coach, inspire, and are confident enough to let their next layer down, if you like, and we're not wanting to be too hierarchical, but their successors to come through, and to give them the time to develop, and give them opportunities like projects to work on, and maybe like an agency model, for example, that you can sort of have people from different departments, middle managers from different departments, working together, learning together, developing together, because, you know, one star shines brightly, but a constellation is way brighter, you know. And so working together is something that I think for anybody is creating that learning culture. A strong learning culture really does embed good business principles, because people understand, if you communicate with them the why of what we're doing is it, they do it much better.
Okay. So that sounds much more like a strategic HR type approach. And if we're trying to help organizations and leaders sort of cross that bridge, if they're not necessarily sort of thinking about it in those terms at the moment. So if you had 15 minutes with a CEO, for example, what would be the points that you would focus on?
So I would say the employee experience is as important as the customer experience.
Okay. And what do you mean by employee
So
experience?
in terms of playing to their strengths, playing to their skills, you know, the work that we've done in the past, where we've utilized, say, psychometrics to understand people's strengths and their ability, because it's the data is there to say, if you play to people's strengths rather than trying to develop their weaknesses, for want of a better way to describe it, you get a much greater result. And I think focusing on people's strengths will enable them to then be much more business savvy and business focused, because then you give them the confidence. Because if you are comfortable with your strengths and you're good at it, then you have much better ability to project that to your clients.
As you know, I'm a big fan of this. So the neuroscience around this I find absolutely fascinating. So I think historically, just, you know, thinking about myself, years gone by, I'd have focused very much on what I was not capable of doing. You know, I should probably go and learn to code Python, which is utterly ridiculous. Why I would think that would be something I'd have to do is crazy, when actually what I'm good at is customer service and that customer experience, actually focusing in on that and further honing my skills. So doing that as a collective, understanding what that entire team's set of strengths looks like, to me, makes a huge amount of sense.
Yeah.
Is it a complicated process?
No, not at all. Not at all. It's certainly the one I use, which is McQuaig. I have ologies in quite a few, but this one I find very very easy, straightforward. It's easy for the person doing it. And the report that we get is very comprehensive. And then they have an AI capability that you can hone in on say a coaching program for that person, honing in on them as the individual. And it's not a test. It's all about their preferences. So, and it's playing to people's preferences. And you do need to have a blend. If everybody looked the same, then we'd be in trouble, because we'd all be doing all the things that we like, and then there'd be nobody over here. So you do need that blend, that complementary strengths across the piece. It also helps people to understand the basics of introverts and extroverts, how introverts don't like being bounced on by an extrovert, and how an extrovert gets annoyed when an introvert isn't verbalizing, knowing that they have a good idea. And so it's giving them a common language to be able to understand each other and complement each other. It also, when you're looking at the skills needed for a job, a role, or a project, you can then play to the strengths of the person. Right, put somebody like Pia in charge of this, but don't put Pia in charge of that, and put Collette in charge of this, but don't put her in charge of that. And it doesn't mean to say that you can't do it, but because it's not your preference, it's about enjoying. We work too hard not to enjoy life as well. So I
Absolutely.
find it is very complementary to any leadership development program, I have to say. And I find it gives a self-development tool as well. So it just for me it's super helpful. And as you say, it's getting into people's psyche without being hoodoo voodoo, and again, that don't do that HR hoodoo voodoo on me. And it's not, but it talks the language. And when you feed back to people, they go, oh yeah, and they recognize it. I've only ever had one time when somebody said, well, that's not me. And I basically said, well, you fid then, because the system is very clever. and it's people appreciate it, and people always like to know about themselves, let's be honest. But it also gives insight to a leader as to their team as well, and how they can play to their strengths.
And that's obviously an incredibly important component of culture building.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if the team is coming to the table understanding their strengths and their weaknesses, and they're being encouraged to openly discuss this about themselves with each other, that has a very positive impact on culture.
And we tend not to talk about weaknesses, because it's just about preferences. And I think, if we're honest with ourselves, we all know what we're good at and what we're not good at. I had a boss years ago who said, you're very good at the things you like doing. And which is very true. And I feel then, as a team dynamic, if they understand each other, then it's like, well, let me take that off, because and the person who's the completer finisher, who likes the detail. You know the person who's the shaper, who, just give me 80-20 and I'm good, and a leader, if he has that information, those analytics in front of them about his team or her team, is better informed in terms of how to move things forward and have success. It builds agility, productivity, and it's about working smart, not hard. And I know that's a very old, sort of terminology, but it's true.
No, I think it's still very true. And I think we might all know what we're good and bad at, but our colleagues potentially
Yeah.
don't. And actually, even the motivations behind some of the things that we're very good at, some gatekeepers could, put in extra levels of checking information, but what's the reason behind why they're doing it? Is that a good thing for them personally, or is that driven by crisis or panic or trauma? Just actually understanding why people behave the way that they do, I think is hugely important to really build those teams and understand each other really well, right?
And including the leader, including the boss. And if a boss is willing to show their own vulnerability, and that's not weakness, that's just I don't have all the answers, because they don't. And I think if they have the strength to be able to say, I don't have all the answers, but let's work on it together. And this is the vision, this is where we're going, this is the company strategy. This is where I think we're going, but I need you to work with me. What makes us great and what can make us even better, and it's those kind of things. So it's focusing forward, focusing on the positive. What's happened has happened, and no point in crying over spilt milk, kind of thing. Learn from it, absolutely, but then focus forward and with positive intent. And that sort of my growth mindset really is very important, and not standing still. Anybody said, oh, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yes, to a certain extent, and certain things, when it's legal, you have to leave it. This is legal and you do what you have to do. But if you stand still, everybody will surpass you, and you have to evolve, you have to iterate. And that's why learning all the time is so key. And what do we learn from that? What can we do? And I think that sort of skill set talent model is something is very prevalent now, and I think is absolutely for the future.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of going back to that strategic HR piece. So I'm thinking of examples in the past couple of decades where HR really has been kind of, I think you used the word police. They're that function where they conduct the exit interviews. They're responsible for reporting the churn and headcount. Whereas actually, if you were to take this approach where your strength, not testing, that's not the right word, but if you're focusing and understanding each of the team members' strengths and allowing them to be involved in really making that business impact because they're doing what they do best, that feels like you're actually getting ahead of that rather than kind of mopping up
Absolutely.
any difficulties sort of at review time that you might uncover.
Yeah. And it's just on that point, sort of building on that, when you say like review time, it shouldn't be just an annual thing, and you get people going, what did I write last year? And and it should be just regular check-ins, and having OKRs that are maybe just for a month. It may be 6 months, it may be it's something that is tangible, and you check in. And also the flexibility in terms of, well, that was a priority and now we need to change and move to something else, because things happen. You have a project plans slip for whatever reason, or I think it's understanding that you have a very clear business focus and how you communicate it to people, and that they understand, but you also allow them to ask questions. Because I think, but again, it's not just a free-for-all soapbox stuff. It's how you do it. So it's about employee engagement, pulse surveys, and what energizes you at work, for example. What's getting in your way? What skills do you want to build this year? Having those questions with people that they feel engaged in, and feel that they can make a difference, they can be part of it.
Yeah.
And
My
that
my
would
palms are sweating. I'm thinking about some historic annual reviews, which I exactly the point you made. An annual review is crazy because I cannot remember what I did yesterday, let alone what somebody that I've worked with might have done 11 months ago, which could have been utterly genius and has not been captured.
Exactly. And the opposite. So say the person that you're having the meeting with, and they did an amazing job the day before, but they've been rubbish all year, but they did an amazing job that day. That's what you're going to focus on, and vice versa. Somebody who's been a brilliant performer and had an off day the day before you have your meeting, you're going to focus on that. Or people have done in the past, and that's so the regular check-ins is absolutely something that I've always advocated. So I think
So do you class that as a sort of a leadership, thing to do, an essential thing to do? That's
it comes
something
back to that constant coaching, mentoring as a leader, um, and maybe even having that feedback from the individuals as well, and sort of making it very much two-way. We're in this together, you know, and I truly am an advocate that I'm only as good as the people that work with me, for me.
Totally. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so to that end, it is that adaptability, that coaching, that inspiration that is provided. You think of the best leaders that you've worked for, it's because they're and they don't have to be, it's not always about charisma, but it's the ones that really have made a difference, but they've listened, and
Yeah.
they question back, and they then involve the people in the decisions going forward. Now, of course, there are times when you have to say, we've made a decision, this is what we're doing, but you still need to explain the why we're doing it.
Yes. Yeah, I absolutely worked with some leaders on just a simple decision matrix. This is the outcome that needs to be. This is what we need to decide on. These are the people that are involved in that decision making process, and the why,
Yep.
and why those people are qualified to be involved in that decision process, and deadlines, schedules, what the output is. And as long as everybody is aware of that process, then I've seen less and less dissent around that
Yeah.
process. If it's kept away,
Yeah.
and it's a big black void,
They'll
then
fill the space.
that's when people will be asking questions.
Yeah, if you have a RACI, is basically what you're describing. It makes things much clearer for people, and it builds a culture of trust as well. And I think that's all important. It is about treating people like grown-ups, and
Yes.
and if trust isn't there, or if you think, well, I can't trust that person, then you need to think about whether you want to work with that person, because or vice versa, and trust is an absolute key in any business as well.
If trust is lost, how difficult is it to rebuild it?
Very difficult. Very difficult. It's like when you first meet somebody, you take 3 seconds to make your mind up. It takes a lot longer to change that. And if there's a perception, and people's perceptions are their reality, and if there's a perception that there's trust is not there, they will be wary for a long time, and it's trying to build that trust. But the hardest part is when the leader, the manager, doesn't know that that person is not trusting.
Okay, so what are the questions that leaders could be asking?
I think it's about, like I said before, it's about what is energizing them, what makes you tick. I think it's about focusing forwards, as I say, and it's about embracing AI, for example, and how that can be put into, so that it gives people the opportunity. It's not a threat, because that has been a discussion about what AI is going to replace me. So it's about, if you're embracing technology, how that can make their job richer, that they're not just doing the admin, etc. I think now you can't ignore a push for flexibility and well-being. You can't. That's still there. That flexibility, um, and I think moving to the skills-based talent models, I think is the way forward. I mean, but again, culture is the biggest differentiator
Yeah.
in all of this, and companies who invest in it will be the ones that succeed.
Okay. So, looking ahead then. So things seem to be changing dramatically and rapidly every day from a technology perspective, from a business perspective, from an economic, political, social, all of the elements seem to be changing every single day. So this is a tough question. But if you're looking ahead over the next 12 months and you're talking to those business leaders, what would you be focusing on?
I think it's focusing on almost I hesitate to use this word, but like an audit about the must-dos, the should-dos, and the could-dos, and making sure that you haven't lost sight of your vision and that it's understood by your people and the part they have to play in that. And it's about communicating much more than I think a lot of businesses do. One of the key things that businesses struggle with is time. And the hardest course to get anybody on is a time management course. And it is about making time. I remember in the past, we'd have working parties about working parties and meetings about the meetings that we'd had, but no time to actually do the outcomes that we decided to do. And then you get burnout, because people are working late into the evening, etc., etc. So I think it is making sure that it is that agility, that productivity, but in the right way. But for me, it's about education. It's about leaders understanding their teams and spending time with their team so they can get the best out of them, so they can, focus on that strategic things while knowing that their business is in safe hands.
Okay. So back to the time problem, leaders should be spending more time with their people. They're potentially time poor. Are there any
So,
any ways
yeah, I mean,
sort
you
of
and I
suggest?
have talked about it. It's about providing bite-size, sort of learning opportunities. You don't have to take the team away for days or whatever. And it's just giving people, and people learn in different ways. So some people want to learn through a podcast. Some people like to read. Some people like to be able to dip in and dip out. So it's providing those bite-size pieces that then they have I guess like a library that they can choose from, which is relevant to them in their situation today. And 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 I think that will absolutely help. You're driving home or you're commuting, you can listen to a podcast, right? And that's a good way to continue your learning, but you're not still having to sit in front of a PC. You can do it whilst you're on the hoof. So I think it's finding different ways to continue grow and develop people and give them the toolkit, because quite often, and particularly with middle managers, the ones that get promoted because they're good at that job, but they don't get they get the toolkit, but they might not be given a key or told how to open it or indeed use the tools within it. And it's
Yeah.
making sure that if you do give them the toolkit, you give them the understanding of how to use it and what to do with it. And that doesn't have to be the leaders, because find mentors from other departments. As I say, there's 5 generations in the workplace. Let's get people mentoring and coaching You know, I great advocate, of course, as we both are,
Naturally.
of coaching, but because people find their own solutions then. You know, I've done mentoring, I've done coaching, I've done counseling, and they all have a place. Coaching is enabling people to have an aha moment, to find their way. And I think it's important for them to find their way, but start with the understanding of this is how the T dynamics, this is how they work, and then let them learn in the way that they learn best.
Do you have any sort of recommendations on um, uh, libraries or a system or a tool or a process or something? You've mentioned McQuaig. Is there any other ways of approaching this if leaders are thinking about, okay, actually, I could be recommending podcasts or something?
Come through you was one.
Realize as I was saying, that's probably a terrible question.
You know, there's lots of opportunities out there. You know, it's TED Talks. So TED Talks are always interesting and entertaining as well at the same time. Um, um, LinkedIn Learning, you know, that's something that is a useful tool. I think actually also getting people out into doing, you know, that there's culture and there's the planet, you know, and you know, getting teams to go and do something and not just clean the same thing that another team has cleaned the week before. You know, doing something that actually it's not just an assault course kind of thing, but it's again doing something together, but that can add a difference. You know, giving people time to volunteer, because they then go into other businesses and learn something and they can bring that back into the workplace. So there's a win-win situation there. So there's
How
lots
do
of
you
opportunities
help?
for learning.
How do you help an organization find those foundational blocks to really think about the type of culture that suits their organization? Who should the leaders be speaking to?
That's difficult to answer in terms of because it depends on the business. It depends on it is coming back to their what for, and then bespoking it almost to. I mean, obviously there's core skills that people need, but I think it's then having the agility to be able to bespoke it to their business. So you know, even just going in and just having a consultant saying, right, what presses your buttons? What what what's going to make this work? What are your team dynamics? You know, because there's teams that are together, and then there's the teams that are remote. There are teams that are global and across all different time spans. So it you know, it has to be flexible enough to be able to accommodate. You know, one size doesn't fit all, unfortunately.
No. And I suppose if you're engaging your teams with the kind of, thinking about strengths and thinking about team structure, I guess their input's quite critical as well, right?
It's where you determine where are the skills gap? You know, what are you missing? And so what do we need to build? But until you do that, get that information, get that data, it's more guesstimate.
So what about, I mean, I don't think either of us have said AI yet. Perhaps
I
we
did.
have. Um, what's your view on what's going on around us right now, and potentially what's coming up for the sort of the HR and people side of things?
So I think AI absolutely has a place, but so do
Mhm.
human beings. I think for me, the ability to utilize AI means I don't have to waste a whole heap of time working on something where I can just ask AI to help me, and then it gives me time. So coming back to the time piece, utilizing AI gives you more time.
Yeah.
And I think it's complementary. We're still learning. It's part of our life. You know, we were talking the other day, life before mobiles, we managed, right? But it does make life a lot easier, of course.
Mm.
So I think it really is a very useful tool, used in the right way. And that's the caveat I would always put on it. When in my experience, I've had, say, CVs come through, and the person who hasn't actually looked at the document that they put into AI and saying, write my CV, and it's got all the track changes still on it, is not somebody I'm going to employ, because they're too lazy to bother to do something about it. But the one who hones in on what they're highlighting, their skills that appeals to the job, and that's not telling fibs, that's just focusing. We all know with LinkedIn, for example, if it asks for a dynamic, outgoing person, if you don't put outgoing and dynamic in your CV or your cover letter, you're not going to get through, because it's not a human being that's looking at it in the first instance. So it's and that's a shame, because if people don't know those kind of nuances, that's where I worry with AI, that we're missing a lot of talent because they're not getting in front of people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's educating people how to project themselves. There's a lot of people coming out of university who can't get jobs, but then we've got a problem with finding people, and it's an age-old problem about how you marry that up.
And the flip side of that is how AI is being used inside of organizations. CEOs' views, the leadership views, are the policies in place? Is there a very clear message and guidance for
Absolutely.
users inside of organizations?
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it goes back to the basics of social media as well. Um, it's like, think before you do. Because when people are sitting in their home on the sofa and just doing, and then then it's out there, and once it's out there, it's out there. And I again, in recruitment, and people do go on to social media to look at people's profiles, and again, just a simple thing that somebody's there, that their profile picture is a topless picture, which in the privacy of your own home, that's absolutely fine. But it's like, maybe not. And that's not judging the body, but it's just like, yeah, it's something that you just need to be mindful of. So I think it's making sure that people are ambassadors and advocates of their company. And it's not about being free range chicken. There needs to be guardrails, but as long as it's clear for people and they understand what's asked of them and what they have to do and the value they can add, then you're in a good place.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the questions I'm asking my guests is to think about leadership and some experiences that they might have had in the past or even in the present. Do you have an anecdote around bad leadership? Good leadership? Remember, this is not naming and shaming.
No.
This is just...
Yes, I do. I have a couple. One it was more amusing than anything else, but somebody it was in FMCG, but it was somebody who would phone me up this was when I was more junior HR person, and I think I was a personnel person then, but a more junior HR person, and they would phone me up and said, "I've just told so and so to get lost," and you're like, great. And my biggest coup in terms of educating these people, I then would get a phone call saying, "I'm just about to tell somebody to get lost." So I had damage limitation going on. So for me, I've achieved something in terms of being able to do something about it before things were said that shouldn't have been said. You know, I've had situations where somebody takes a Polaroid picture, so to speak, not literally speaking, but metaphorically speaking, and say, "I want them fired," and you're like, "Why?" And then just moving them to a different department until such time that it was forgotten about. But it's the leaders that are, it's only their way. You know, they're not open-minded to other ideas. They're just, it's JDI, just do it. And yeah, I when I was doing interim consulting, you know, that's when, you know, if I was asked to stay on, I wouldn't, because I can't deal with this culture. Just no.
What drew you to HR people?
I've always loved people development. I was a trainer before I became an HR person. So I think seeing people develop and grow has always been in my heart, if you like. Um, and then it has been that swing of being a trainer, then becoming an HR person, but then the world became more and more litigious, and it was that focus on employment law. But it's looking at it in a different way of what can we do to make sure that people aren't complaining or aren't misbehaving, and again, not coming back to that police bit. You know, what's driving these behaviors? And that's where I've always been drawn to, is that sort of why people do what they do. You know, I know it's not the topic, but you know, again, you know, you'll have somebody who's been a brilliant performer and then suddenly they go a bit off, and you think, why? And could be menopause, could be something going on in their home life. So it's not just jumping to the conclusion, oh, well, they've done a bad job, and you go down a performance things. It is having that ability, and that's coming back to that middle management, that they have the ability to have those conversations with their employees, to understand them, and recognize and understand when something that's out of character for that person. So I've always been into that psychology. That people psychology is something that's been key. But again, coming grounded in the fact that you know, what makes a business successful is the people.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us to a natural conclusion there, Pia. Thank you so much. That was
Thank you.
really interesting. Really interesting. I think building the right culture to support the right people and their strengths all feels that it goes hand in hand, and that's a very solid starting point for any business to ground and build themselves from.
Totally. I mean, you express it very well in your book. You know, it's what are those behaviors that we have maybe experienced, and what do they need to look like? You know, that you don't have to tolerate bad behavior.
Yeah.
You know, people do have a choice.
I mean, I say it to my son regularly. It's not the mistake you make; it's what you do next. You know, we all have bad days, bad moments. We do silly things, but as long as you're surrounded by trust, that you've built the right culture, that you've got the opportunity to sort of fix that error,
Exactly.
work out how you'll never do it again. That's psychological trust in the right culture,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, totally. That you learn from it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and share.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very much. Appreciate it.